She can't love you like I do." The words escaped before Victoria Sterling could stop them, hanging in the silence of the elevator like a confession that had waited far too many lonely nights to be spoken. Ethan Brooks stood motionless, one hand wrapped around a small paper bag from the neighborhood bakery, the other holding the backpack his 8-year-old daughter had forgotten to unpack after school. His warm brown eyes lifted toward Victoria with quiet surprise, not offense, not excitement. Only the gentle confusion of a man who had never imagined someone like her would ever speak those words. The elevator continued its slow climb, the soft hum of the cables filling the space where neither of them seemed able to breathe. Outside, rain tapped lightly against the towering glass walls of Sterling Heights, one of the most prestigious residential buildings in downtown Chicago. Inside, polished brass reflected the warm ceiling lights, making the small elevator feel strangely intimate despite its luxury. Ethan forced a polite smile, the kind that had carried him through years of loss without asking the world for sympathy. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to make things awkward. I just thought. You were asking why I was wearing a jacket instead of my usual work clothes." Victoria looked away before he could notice the moisture gathering in her eyes. She had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without trembling. She had stood before shareholders, politicians, and television cameras without losing her composure. Yet one simple sentence from the quiet single-father renting apartment 18B had undone every wall she had spent years building around her heart. Moments earlier, their conversation had been harmless. Ethan had smiled as they stepped into the elevator together after another ordinary Tuesday evening. "Big plans tomorrow?" Victoria had asked casually, pretending to scroll through emails on her phone while secretly hoping he would say he planned another movie night with Lily. Instead, Ethan had smiled with shy uncertainty. "Actually, I have a date. For ordinary words. For words that somehow felt louder than every boardroom applause Victoria had ever received." Before reason could stop emotion, the truth escaped her lips. "She can't love you like I do." Now neither of them knew where to look. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the 18th floor. The doors slid open with quiet precision, revealing a warmly lit hallway lined with framed watercolor paintings and fresh white lilies arranged by the concierge every morning. Ethan hesitated before stepping out. "Good night, Miss Sterling," he said gently, offering the same respectful smile he always had. "I hope tomorrow is kind to you." Victoria watched him disappear down the hallway toward the apartment where laughter always sounded genuine and where a little girl still believed every bedtime story deserved a happy ending. Only after his front door closed did Victoria finally allow herself to whisper the truth. No board meeting, no fortune, and no title had ever given her the courage to admit. "I've been hoping tomorrow would finally bring you to me." The next morning arrived with a pale golden sunrise stretching across the Chicago skyline, painting the windows of Sterling Heights with soft reflections that made the 40-story tower seem almost peaceful before another demanding business day began. Ethan Brooks had already been awake for nearly 2 hours. By 6 o'clock, the smell of fresh pancakes drifted through apartment 18B while coffee brewed quietly in the corner of the modest kitchen. His daughter Lily sat on a stool, swinging her legs beneath the counter, carefully arranging sliced strawberries into the shape of a heart on her plate. "Daddy," she asked with an innocent smile, "are you nervous about your date?" Ethan laughed under his breath as he flipped another pancake onto the skillet. "A little," he admitted. "It has been a very long time since I have taken someone to dinner." Lily grinned proudly. "You deserve someone who smiles when you walk into a room." Ethan paused for a brief moment. Children often spoke truths that adults spent years trying to avoid. He reached over and gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from her face before placing another pancake on her plate. "I already have someone who smiles every morning," he said, warmly. "That makes me pretty lucky." Downstairs, the lobby slowly came alive with residents leaving for work. The scent of polished cedar mixed with fresh flowers placed beside the reception desk, while quiet piano music drifted through hidden speakers. Victoria Sterling crossed the marble floor dressed in an elegant navy business suit, her assistant walking half a step behind while reviewing the day's schedule. Meetings with investors, a charity luncheon, 2 acquisition calls, a television interview before sunset. Every minute of her day had been carefully planned, yet none of it occupied her thoughts. Instead, she found herself glancing almost instinctively toward the elevators, hoping to catch one ordinary glimpse of a man who had unknowingly become the calmest part of her complicated life. She still remembered the first afternoon Ethan had moved into the building nearly 3 years earlier. There had been no moving company, no expensive furniture, no entourage. Just an aging pickup truck, a few carefully labeled boxes, a second-hand bookshelf with one broken corner, and a little girl wearing oversized pink rain boots who insisted on carrying a box almost larger than herself. While other residents complained about delayed valet service or the wrong brand of sparkling water, Ethan had spent 20 minutes helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries without realizing anyone was watching. Victoria had been watching from the security office that afternoon. She often reviewed new resident footage herself, a habit her executives considered unnecessary, but one she quietly defended. Buildings were never truly about concrete or glass. They were about people. Something about the gentle father with tired eyes had lingered in her thoughts ever since. Over the following months, she noticed the smallest things. Ethan always greeted every employee by name. He never ignored the maintenance staff. Every Friday evening, he brought fresh cookies to the front desk because Lily believed everyone deserved dessert before the weekend. He quietly repaired a broken bicycle for a young boy in the building courtyard without accepting a single dollar. He lived with quiet dignity, asking for nothing, expecting even less. Victoria had built an empire worth billions by learning how to recognize value before anyone else could see it. The greatest investment she had ever discovered was not another company or another skyscraper. It was the extraordinary kindness of a man who believed nobody was watching at all. Victoria Sterling had spent her entire adult life believing that success was measured in numbers. Quarterly reports, rising stock prices, expanding skylines, and headlines celebrating another remarkable acquisition had become the rhythm of her existence. Yet none of those victories ever followed her home. When the boardroom lights dimmed and the chauffeured car disappeared into the underground garage of Sterling Heights, silence always greeted her first. It was a silence so familiar that she had stopped noticing it until Ethan Brooks unknowingly changed its meaning. The change had not happened in a single dramatic moment. It had arrived quietly, almost invisibly, through hundreds of ordinary days that no financial report could ever record. One winter afternoon, she watched through the lobby windows as freezing rain coated the sidewalks with thin sheets of ice. Most residents hurried inside without lifting their eyes from their phones. But Ethan noticed an elderly doorman struggling to spread salt across the entrance. Without removing his own gloves, he picked up the heavy bucket and spent nearly 20 minutes clearing the walkway before carrying the exhausted employee inside for a cup of hot coffee. He never mentioned it again. Another evening, Victoria happened to leave a conference call later than expected. As she crossed the courtyard, she heard gentle laughter coming from the community garden. Ethan and Lily were helping a young boy replant flowers that had wilted during an unusually hot week. Their hands were covered in soil, their shoes stained with mud, yet they laughed as though they had discovered hidden treasure beneath every handful of earth. The next morning, colorful blossoms greeted every resident entering the building. No plaque carried Ethan's name. No one applauded. That was exactly how he preferred it. Victoria found herself noticing details she had never cared about before. Ethan always held the elevator when someone was running late. He remembered birthdays of the concierge staff better than some executives remembered their own employees. Every Saturday, he and Lily delivered homemade muffins to Mrs. Henderson on the 22nd floor because arthritis made baking impossible for her now. Even after working long hours designing homes for other families, Ethan somehow still found enough energy to make strangers feel seen. Victoria often asked herself the same quiet question. How could a man who had lost so much still give away so much kindness without expecting anything in return? One afternoon, she quietly asked the building manager to show her Ethan's rental history. Every payment had arrived on time, sometimes within hours of his freelance invoices clearing the bank. There were no complaints, no special requests, no demands for upgrades despite living in a building filled with people who considered luxury an entitlement. She closed the file almost immediately, ashamed that curiosity had tempted her into his private life. Respect, she reminded herself, meant allowing good people the dignity of their own story. That evening she found Lily sitting alone in the lobby, drawing with colored pencils while waiting for her father to finish a client call upstairs. Victoria sat beside her without mentioning business or school. Lily proudly held up her drawing. It showed a small apartment beneath an enormous heart stretching across the sky. Inside the heart stood 3 smiling figures. Victoria smiled gently. Who is the third person? Lily studied the picture for a moment before answering with complete innocence. I do not know yet, she whispered, but I think Daddy has been lonely long enough. Victoria looked at the drawing a little longer than she intended, realizing that somewhere between board meetings and lonely evenings, her own heart had quietly begun hoping that one day the little girl might accidentally draw her there. Thursday arrived wrapped in soft autumn sunlight, and for the first time in years Ethan Brooks found himself standing in front of his bedroom mirror longer than necessary. He adjusted the collar of the charcoal blue shirt Lily had picked from the closet and smiled at his own reflection with quiet embarrassment. You are making that face again, Lily giggled from the doorway. What face? Ethan asked. The one Mommy used to say meant you were thinking too much. The smile on Ethan's face softened. Some memories still carried sadness, but they no longer carried despair. Maybe I am, he admitted. Lily skipped across the room and carefully straightened his collar with surprising seriousness. Miss Rachel seems nice, she said. She likes books, and she laughed at all your bad jokes at the school fundraiser. Ethan chuckled. You noticed that? I notice everything, Lily replied proudly. You always tell me that kindness deserves another chance. Maybe hearts do too. Ethan knelt beside his daughter and hugged her gently. You have become much wiser than your father. No, she whispered. I just learned from watching you. Several floors above them, Victoria Sterling stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her executive office overlooking Lake Michigan. The city stretched endlessly beneath the morning light, alive with ambition and opportunity, yet none of it quieted the restlessness in her heart. Her assistant entered carrying a leather portfolio. Your 6 o'clock dinner with the investment group has been confirmed, she said. Victoria closed the folder without reading it. Please reschedule. Her assistant looked surprised. Again, Victoria nodded gently. Something more important came up. She never explained what that something was. By late afternoon, the lobby of Sterling Heights glowed beneath warm amber lighting as residents returned home. Victoria had planned to leave through the private garage entrance to avoid another awkward encounter, but fate had always preferred ordinary hallways over carefully designed plans. As she stepped into the elevator, the doors opened one final time before closing. Ethan entered wearing the same charcoal shirt Lily had chosen, holding a small bouquet of white daisies wrapped in brown paper. He looked both confident and uncertain, like a man trying to believe life still held. Unexpected blessings. Good evening, he said politely. Victoria answered with a smile that required every ounce of discipline she possessed. You look very nice. Ethan glanced down with quiet humility. Thank you. Lily insisted this shirt made me look younger. Victoria laughed softly despite herself. I think your daughter is probably right. Silence settled between them, comfortable on the surface yet unbearably heavy beneath it. The elevator descended floor by floor, while the gentle melody, playing through hidden speakers, seemed strangely distant. Ethan finally broke the silence. I almost canceled tonight. Victoria's heart paused. Really, I've spent so many years focused on being Lily's father that I almost forgot what it felt like to simply meet someone for dinner. He smiled faintly, but Lily reminded me that moving forward does not mean leaving beautiful memories behind. Victoria lowered her eyes before they revealed more than she intended. She admired him even more in that moment. He was not searching for someone to replace the love he had lost. He was simply allowing himself permission to hope again. The elevator reached the lobby with its familiar chime. Ethan stepped toward the doors, then turned back with his usual kindness. "I hope you have a peaceful evening, Miss Sterling." She watched him walk across the polished marble floor, the bouquet resting gently in his hand, until the revolving doors carried him into the golden light beyond the building. Only after he disappeared into the busy Chicago evening did Victoria quietly press one trembling hand against her heart. Money had taught her how to win negotiations. Success had taught her how to command respect. But neither had ever prepared her for the quiet heartbreak of watching the man she loved walk toward another woman while believing that was exactly where happiness was waiting for him. The evening settled gently over Chicago as the city lights shimmered across the river like thousands of quiet promises waiting to be fulfilled. Ethan Brooks arrived at a small Italian restaurant tucked between a neighborhood bookstore and a family-owned bakery, a place chosen not for elegance but for warmth. Rachel Parker was already waiting near the window, rising with an easy smile that immediately put him at ease. "I'm glad you came," she said sincerely. Ethan smiled as he pulled out her chair before taking his own seat. "So am I. It has been a long time since I have shared dinner without someone asking for extra syrup with their pancakes." Rachel laughed softly. "Your daughter sounds wonderful." For the next hour, they talked about ordinary things that somehow felt extraordinary. They spoke about favorite novels, childhood memories, neighborhood festivals, and the strange comfort of rainy afternoons spent reading by a window. Rachel was kind, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in Ethan's life. She asked about Lily with respect, never treating fatherhood as an obstacle, but as something admirable. Ethan found himself relaxing for the first time in years. Across town, however, another dinner table remained untouched. Victoria Sterling sat alone in the private dining room of her penthouse, the carefully prepared meal growing cold beneath the soft candlelight. Her housekeeper quietly approached. "Would you like me to serve dinner now?" Victoria looked toward the window overlooking the glowing skyline before answering. "Not yet." 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, she shook her head with a gentle smile that could not quite hide the sadness in her eyes. "Please give everything to the night staff before it goes cold." After the room became quiet again, Victoria walked toward the grand piano that had stood untouched for months. She rested her fingertips lightly on the polished keys, but did not play. Instead, she found herself remembering countless ordinary moments that had quietly become precious. Ethan laughing with Lily while decorating cookies in the community kitchen. Ethan carrying heavy grocery bags for an exhausted young mother. Ethan kneeling to tie Lily's shoelaces before school, while listening as though every word she spoke was the most important conversation in the world. None of those memories belonged in newspapers or business magazines. Yet together, they had become more valuable than every award displayed in Victoria's office. Back at the restaurant, dessert arrived with 2 slices of homemade apple pie. Rachel smiled warmly. "Can I ask you something honest?" Ethan nodded. "Of course." She folded her hands around her coffee cup. "You are kind, thoughtful, and clearly devoted to your daughter. But sometimes when you become quiet, it feels as though a part of your heart is somewhere else." Ethan looked down for a moment before answering. "Maybe it is." Rachel waited patiently. "I'm not talking about my past," Ethan said softly. "I have made peace with that. It is something different. Lately I keep thinking about someone, and I cannot explain why." Rachel smiled with surprising understanding instead of disappointment. Sometimes our hearts recognize something before our minds are ready to understand it. Ethan considered her words during the drive home. As he stepped into the familiar lobby of Sterling Heights just before 10 o'clock, he noticed a single lamp glowing behind the reception desk while the rest of the building rested in peaceful silence. The night concierge smiled as he handed Ethan a small paper bag. "Miss Sterling asked me to give this to you if you came home late." Ethan looked puzzled. Inside was a box of fresh blueberry muffins, still slightly warm from the bakery, along with a handwritten note in elegant script that simply read, "For breakfast with Lily. I hope your evening brought you happiness." Ethan stood quietly beneath the soft lobby lights, holding the warm paper bag in his hands, unaware that upstairs, Victoria was standing beside her darkened window, hoping with all her heart that she had just wished another woman happiness while silently breaking her own. Saturday morning arrived with crisp autumn air drifting through the open windows of apartment 18B, carrying the comforting scent of fresh coffee and distant church bells across the neighborhood. Ethan Brooks carefully arranged the blueberry muffins on a small ceramic plate while Lily climbed onto her favorite chair at the kitchen table. She stared at the handwritten note one more time before looking thoughtfully at her father. "Daddy," she asked, "why does Miss Sterling always remember us?" Ethan smiled as he poured a glass of orange juice for her. "She is a thoughtful person. Some people are simply generous." Lily slowly shook her head. "No, it is different." Ethan raised an eyebrow with quiet amusement. "Different how?" She folded the note and placed it beside her plate as though it were something precious. "Mrs. Henderson gets flowers on her birthday. Mr. Lewis gets a Christmas card. But Miss Sterling remembers your favorite blueberry muffins. She always asks how your meetings go, and she never forgets my piano recitals." Ethan paused before taking a sip of coffee. He had never considered how closely his daughter observed the world around her. "She cares about people," he answered gently. Lily smiled in a mysterious way only children could. "I think she cares about one person a little more." Ethan laughed softly. "You have quite an imagination." Lily did not argue. She simply looked out the kitchen window with the quiet confidence of someone who believed time would eventually prove her right. Later that afternoon, the building hosted its annual autumn gathering in the rooftop garden, where families shared homemade desserts while children played beneath strings of warm lights stretched between maple trees, beginning to glow with shades of gold and crimson. Victoria Sterling rarely attended resident events despite personally sponsoring every one of them. Public appearances inside her own building often made people uncomfortable once they realized she owned the entire property. But this year, she arrived carrying a homemade apple pie, determined to spend one ordinary afternoon without thinking about board meetings or investment reports. Lily spotted her almost immediately. "Miss Sterling," she called happily before running across the garden. Victoria knelt to meet her with a warm smile. "Hello, sweetheart. Did you enjoy the muffins?" Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Daddy said they were the best breakfast surprise ever." Victoria felt her heart quietly settle at those words. Sometimes even the smallest act of kindness felt like enough. Throughout the afternoon, Lily watched the adults more carefully than anyone realized. She noticed how Victoria's eyes searched for Ethan whenever conversations pulled them apart. She noticed how Ethan instinctively smiled whenever Victoria laughed, even from across the garden. Neither of them seemed aware of the invisible thread connecting every glance, every quiet moment, every shared smile. As the gathering ended and families slowly returned to their apartments, Lily gently tugged on Victoria's sleeve. "Can I tell you a secret?" Victoria leaned closer with a curious smile. "Of course." Lily lowered her voice to an almost playful whisper. "Daddy thinks you're lonely sometimes." Victoria blinked in surprise. "He does." Lily nodded. "He says people who spend all their time taking care of everyone else deserve someone who takes care of them too." Victoria felt emotion rise unexpectedly behind her calm expression. Before she could respond, Lily added one more sentence with complete innocence. "I wish both of you would stop worrying so much and just notice what everybody else already sees." Then she skipped away toward Ethan. Leaving Victoria standing beneath the glowing evening lights with tears, she quickly blinked away. For the first time since that unforgettable elevator ride, hope quietly returned to her heart, because sometimes the clearest truth did not come from powerful executives or careful plans. Sometimes it came from the honest eyes of an 8-year-old little girl who simply wanted the two kindest people she knew to find their way home to each other. Monday morning brought an unexpected invitation that changed everything Ethan Brooks believed he understood about Sterling Heights. A neatly sealed envelope waited at the reception desk with his name written across the front in elegant handwriting. The concierge smiled warmly as he handed it over. "Miss Sterling asked that you receive this personally." Ethan thanked him and opened the envelope only after reaching the quiet corner of the lobby. Inside was an invitation to attend a resident advisory luncheon on the top executive floor, a place few tenants had ever seen. The note explained that several longtime residents have been selected to share ideas for improving the community. Ethan almost declined. He had client deadlines, school pickup, and little interest in formal meetings. But Lily looked at the invitation that evening and smiled. "You always tell me that listening is one way to care about people. Maybe somebody wants to listen to you this time." The following afternoon, Ethan stepped into a private elevator that rose beyond the residential floors. As the doors opened, he found himself surrounded by quiet elegance. Original artwork decorated the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and a polished bronze plaque near the entrance displayed the words Sterling Holdings Executive Offices. Ethan slowed his pace. He had never realized the corporate headquarters occupied the upper levels of the same building he had called home for 3 years. Before anyone could greet him, 2 executives walked past discussing the afternoon schedule. "The chief executive officer wants the renovation proposal finalized before the board meeting," one said. "Miss Sterling never compromises on projects connected to this property," the other replied. "She personally approved every resident improvement over the last 3 years." Ethan stopped walking. A receptionist noticed his confusion and smiled politely. "You must be Mr. Brooks. Miss Sterling will be with you shortly." He looked toward the hallway where framed photographs documented the history of Sterling Holdings. In nearly every picture, Victoria stood at the center, accepting awards, cutting ceremonial ribbons, meeting governors, and leading international business delegations. Beneath one portrait, a simple caption read, "Victoria Sterling, founder and chief executive officer." Ethan stared at the photograph in complete silence. Memories rushed together with startling clarity. The handwritten notes, the unexpected kindnesses, the carefully reduced rent increase everyone in the building had celebrated. The maintenance request completed almost immediately whenever Lily mentioned even the smallest problem. None of it had been random. Victoria entered the conference room moments later, her expression brightening when she saw him. "Thank you for coming," she said warmly. Ethan forced a respectful smile, but something inside him had quietly shifted. "I did not know this was your company," he answered. "Victoria Hesitatif. I never try to hide it. I simply never wanted my position to affect how people felt around me." Ethan nodded slowly, though uncertainty lingered behind his calm expression. Throughout the luncheon, he listened politely as residents discussed playground upgrades, library expansions, and community programs, yet his thoughts remained elsewhere. Every generous gesture he had once accepted as simple kindness now seemed connected to unimaginable wealth and influence. Walking home later that afternoon, Ethan wondered whether he had mistaken compassion for charity. He had always valued standing on his own feet, providing for Lily without favors or special treatment. Now he questioned every memory that had once brought comfort. High above the city, Victoria watched from her office window as Ethan crossed the courtyard with his shoulders just a little heavier than before. And for the first time since she had allowed her heart to hope, she realized that the truth she had hidden out of humility might become the very reason she lost the man she loved. The apartment felt unusually quiet that evening. Ethan Brooks sat alone at the kitchen table long after Lily had fallen asleep, turning an untouched cup of coffee slowly between his hands. Outside the window, the lights of Chicago shimmered beneath a gentle drizzle, while the familiar comfort of Sterling Heights suddenly felt unfamiliar. He replayed every conversation he had ever shared with Victoria Sterling, every encouraging note, every thoughtful surprise, every unexpected kindness. Until yesterday, those memories had warmed his heart. Now they left him asking a question he could not escape. Had she cared about him, or had she simply cared for him? Ethan had spent his entire life protecting his dignity. After losing his wife, he accepted help only when it was truly necessary, determined that Lily would grow up seeing a father who stood with quiet strength instead of quiet pride. Discovering that the woman he admired was not simply another resident, but the billionaire owner of the building unsettled something deep inside him. He did not resent her success. He respected it. What troubled him was the possibility that every generous gesture had come from unequal ground. The following morning, he made a decision that felt both reasonable and painful. He visited the leasing office and politely requested information about other apartments nearby. The property manager looked surprised. "Is something wrong with your home?" Ethan smiled gently. "No, it has been a wonderful place to live. I simply think it is time for a new chapter." Word traveled faster through the building than Ethan expected. Before lunch, Victoria received a brief message from the leasing manager. "Mr. Brooks has requested transfer documents and information about ending his lease early." She read the message twice before quietly setting her phone on the desk. Every meeting on her calendar suddenly seemed meaningless. By late afternoon, she stood outside apartment 18B with a mixture of courage and uncertainty she had never experienced in any boardroom. When Ethan opened the door, surprise crossed his face before settling into his usual calm expression. "Ms. Sterling," he said politely, "please come in." The apartment smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. Lily was in her room practicing piano, the gentle melody floating softly through the hallway. Victoria looked around the modest living room she had imagined so many times but had never entered. Family photographs lined the bookshelf. Children's drawings covered one wall. Nothing was expensive, yet everything reflected warmth. Ethan offered her a seat before speaking first. "I suppose you heard. Victoria nodded. Yes." Silence settled gently between them. Finally, Ethan spoke with the same honesty that had always defined him. "I do not know how to separate your kindness from your position anymore." Victoria lowered her eyes for a brief moment before meeting his gaze again. "Then let me try." Her voice remained calm, but every word carried years of carefully hidden emotion. "When I approved lower rent increases, every resident benefited, not only you. When I improved the playground, every child smiled there, not only Lily. When I remembered your favorite bakery, it was not because I owned the building. It was because I remembered the first morning you bought those muffins after Lily won her school reading award. I remember things that matter to the people I care about." Ethan listened quietly without interrupting. Victoria continued, her composure softening. "I never wanted you to feel indebted to me. That is why I never introduced myself as the owner. I wanted every conversation we shared to belong to Victoria, not to a title or a bank account." The room became still except for the distant sound of Lily practicing a gentle piano melody. Ethan looked toward the family photographs before returning his eyes to Victoria. For the first time since discovering the truth, he realized she was not asking him to admire her success. She was asking him to believe that her heart had always arrived long before her wealth ever entered the room. The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows of apartment 18B, wrapping the small living room in a quiet warmth that neither Ethan Brooks nor Victoria Sterling seemed eager to disturb. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. Instead, it carried the gentle weight of two hearts finally speaking the same language. Ethan looked down at his hands before lifting his eyes to meet hers once more. "I've spent years teaching Lily that dignity means standing on your own feet," he said softly. "When I learned who you really were, I became afraid that I had mistaken generosity for equality." Victoria nodded with complete understanding. "And I have spent years to try to make sure no one ever felt small because of what I have. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that hiding the truth could also create distance." Before either of them could say another word, the sound of small footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lily appeared carrying the drawing she had made days earlier, the one with the enormous heart stretching across the sky. She smiled brightly as she looked from Ethan to Victoria. "I think this picture is finally finished." Ethan laughed gently. "Is it?" Lily walked over and placed the drawing on the coffee table. The two figures she had drawn before were still there, but now the third person had a familiar navy blue jacket and long brown hair. Victoria covered her mouth as emotion quietly filled her eyes. "You remembered," she whispered. Lily shrugged with the simple honesty only children possessed. "I was just waiting for both of you to catch up." The room filled with quiet laughter dissolving days of uncertainty in a single innocent moment. Ethan looked at Victoria, and for the first time, he no longer saw the billionaire whose name appeared in business magazines. He saw the woman who remembered Lily's piano recitals, who noticed his favorite bakery, who had chosen kindness long before she had ever revealed her title. Victoria reached in her handbag and carefully placed a small polished brass key on the coffee table. Ethan looked at it with quiet curiosity. "What is this?" She smiled gently. "It is not a gift." He looked confused. She continued, "Several months ago, I renovated the garden cottage beside the lake on the property outside the city. It has a reading room for Lily, a workshop where you can design without interruptions, and a porch where sunsets last longer than meetings ever should." Ethan started to speak, but Victoria softly shook her head. "Listen first." Her voice trembled with sincerity rather than fear. "I did not build it to impress you. I built it because every time I imagine home, the two of you are already there. Whether you ever step inside is completely your choice. I simply wanted you to know that there has never been a contract attached to my heart." Ethan looked at the small brass key for several quiet seconds before gently closing Victoria's fingers around it again. "A home is not something someone gives another person," he said with a warm smile. "It is something people choose to build together." Victoria's eyes glistened as she nodded. Lily suddenly slipped both of her small hands into theirs and grinned from ear to ear, then stopped talking like grown-ups and started acting like a family. Ethan and Victoria exchanged a long, peaceful look before both of them laughed through happy tears. Outside, the evening light settled gently over Chicago, and for the first time in many years, three hearts looked toward tomorrow without fear. Some people spend their lives searching for miracles in extraordinary places, but the greatest miracles often arrive quietly, wrapped in dignity, patience, second chances, and the courage to let love be seen.